Good afternoon, everybody. We are excited to be here because one of the great things that's happening, not just in the country, but around the world, is the fact that we have embarked upon not only a new innovation in STEM as it relates to quantum literacy and quantum mechanics, quantum science, but we are at a real turning point, not only in education as well, as it relates to the kind of technologies that we are encroaching upon. And it's not just in the future, it's right now. And at this particular time, we're looking at new kind of software and technologies. We've always gone through quite a few different eras, but this is one of the new frontiers of not only hope, but change and also challenge. Particularly today, as we start to talk about the equity of the process of quantum. And that's why we're here today, to have a discussion not only about what quantum is, but also the possibilities and some of the challenges as it relates to encryption, software, all of those things that are going to be embarking upon us, particularly for HBCUs and others, to make sure that we catch up. When you look around the globe, China, Russia, you start to look at the fact that where the United States is in this process. So again, that's what makes this moment a tipping point for all of us today, and for all that are listening to us. So we're going to go into and just kind of introduce the panel a little bit. We have some all-stars here today, and we're excited about that, people that really pour into not only education, but also culture as well. Today we have on the panel Dr. Tim Akers. He is the Assistant Vice President for Research and Innovation at Morgan State University and the PI of this particular Convergence grant. But also Dr. Kevin Peters is with us. He is the Director for the Center of Excellence in Mathematics and Science and Education. And we have with us the one and only, he is the famed radio host of Radio 1. He is the former Senator Larry Young of the Larry Young Morning Show, and also the president of the and community activist for the Baltimore chapter of the National Action Network. And we have with us on the panel, Dr. Stacy Smith. She is the lead strategist for the Ministers Conference Empowerment, CDC. And also we have with us Mr. Ellis Brown is with us. He is, of course, in the Center for Research and Academic Math. So we thank you for being a part, and he can correct me once I get around to him. So we're excited to be here, and we're excited to talk about this great evolution and exploration into quantum. Dr. Akers, let me ask you first, what is quantum and what is quantum literacy?
Well, Bishop, Dr. Daniels, it is an honor also, sir, to have you facilitate and moderate this panel. And I remember over the years where you and I talked about quantum, and it was such a pleasure over at least the past 15 years that I recall. And so I appreciate you asking the question, and thank you, sir. The way our team sees quantum is, quantum by scientific terms is the smallest possible discrete physical object in the known world that we have. And the beautiful thing about quantum is the fact we normally think about traditional physics like an atom, but quantum is different. It is at a subatomic level. And with it being at a subatomic level, the physics is different than what we normally see on a day-to-day level. So it is, in basic terms, the smallest possible known object that exists.
Wow, thank you, thank you. Dr. Peters, let me ask you a question. Can you please tell us how the team sees quantum literacy and its impact historically on underrepresented groups?
Well, as you know, Bishop, we are always behind the 8 ball, 10 steps behind in terms of technology, and our communities really understanding what technology and really where the jobs are. We see this project in terms of quantum literacy as an opportunity to educate our community as to what quantum is and where the jobs will be in the future. We're in the present age of quantum.
Yeah.
It's not the future, it's right here, right now. And our community needs to understand what quantum is all about. And it transcends all kinds of disciplines.
Wow, that's excellent. Did you want to add to that, Mr. Ellis Brown?
I do. I was raised to say you don't correct the pastor, so I'm sorry. Okay, but I work with here at Morgan, and I work in the Division of Research and Economic Development.
Excellent.
I work with Tim Akers. Tim is my boss. He's a pleasure to work with.
You're my boss.
Okay. And so, not to correct the pastor, not to correct your boss, but quantum is also, as he was explaining it, the word quantum describes the field. I think the particular item that Tim was referring to is called a qubit. Okay,
Yep.
so that
Yep.
is the actual piece that's the smallest.
Absolutely.
Quantum is more the field of study.
Yeah. Could you go back and share a little bit about the industry, Dr. Peters and Dr. Akers, just share a little bit about the industry around quantum at this point.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot, and that's why I surround myself with people a lot smarter than me, because they help clarify. That's for sure. Thank you very much. And he is right. Mr. Brown is right on. The industry of quantum is growing, just like the computer industry that we've seen over the decades. We're now at a point to where the technology is becoming so much more changing, in a sense, to where quantum is now becoming its own industry. Yeah. When we normally think of the traditional computer industry, we think of ones and zeros, a binary world. Quantum, ones and zeros are one and the same. There's an overlap. There's an entanglement of this. So the industry itself is becoming quantum biology, quantum physics, quantum mechanics, quantum propulsion systems, quantum epidemiology, quantum networking, quantum sensing. All of these industries are growing to where they're not just like a STEM discipline like math or biology or chemistry, but rather it's a whole industry.
Wow, that's excellent.
I have a question.
I was going to come to you.
I'm going to direct it back to you, Bishop. Now, how does quantum connect to the spiritual world? Can you talk to me about that a little bit?
I was actually going to go there, and so I was following a little schedule here I have. But I wanted to come back to you to find out. He talked about industry. What does that mean for underrepresented
it means
and HBCUs?
Thank you. What it means to me is really jobs and jobs of the future. And what Dr. Akers and Mr. Ellis has said to us is that you don't need a PhD to understand quantum. There are going to be jobs, technicians' jobs, that are related to the quantum industry that transcend food service, health, pharmaceuticals. There are going to be all kinds of jobs. And if we don't get our communities embraced with what quantum literacy is all about, we're going to miss out on that. And that's important that we get our young people, and we have a cohort that we're going to start off with, the ROTC cadets that will get training, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later in quantum.
And with that conversation, I'm going to move into that whole as we move into the urban population and what that means for networking with community. With us again, Mr. Larry Young, and now that we have a better sense of what quantum and quantum literacy is about, can you share with everyone your thoughts on the impact of this quantum age on youth nationally, but also with education itself?
Honestly, Dr. Daniels, I was thinking about sitting here. I'm sitting among all these giants within this particular setting because I'm going to be able to learn from this process as well as participating with you. But I'm troubled as I now have even a better explanation been shared with us. I'm in my 24th year in radio, and I'm just catching up with STEM.
Right.
And our community is just catching up with STEM. And as I've been listening, it's very clear to me that in our communication industry, certainly for those of us who have the opportunity to talk with young folks, hopefully to inspire them in the right direction to go, I get encouragement sitting next to the doctor here that it's jobs, jobs, jobs.
Yeah.
So that's going to say a whole lot to our community. Now, of course, it's got to be supported by actually showing it can occur. I'm just worried about how long it's going to take us to move from learning about STEM. We're just beginning to solely appreciate the value of STEM. Dr. Taborn, one of the fantastic folks who put up the School of Engineering here at Morgan, Dr. Tyrone Taborn. But I'm troubled that it's going to take some time, and I don't want the train to move so fast.
Right.
That just as we think we got STEM wrapped up, here we got this new dimension, and something else comes along. Right. And when you two of you talk about 15 years ago, then I have to ask the two of you, why did y'all wait so long?
Right. And
So our community needs to be in a fast train.
Yeah.
We got to get one of those fast trains, the maglev.
That's it.
We need a maglev approach to this. And so I'm going to do what I can to learn. And then I'm going to take it back to the Talkers Magazine and other hosts to say to them, this is where we are in our communication field. But guys, we got to catch up.
And I think that's what makes this conversation premier, in the sense that we are talking quantum literacy, taxonomy, nascent. We're talking about all of those things that begins to pull at the strings of all groups, whether that is K through 12, all of that, looking at community colleges, looking at community as well. Could you say something about he talked about catching up, and we're really on the frontier of literacy and making sure that people, even beyond degrees, understand the language, the nomenclature of this.
Well, and Dr. Daniels, and I was going to ask Dr. Smith momentarily, have her interject, because she understands a lot in areas of community especially. But here's something that is absolutely, we've been speaking and working with a number of minority business enterprises. And minority business enterprises have never been at the table in this. The nation is experiencing, just in STEM, we've seen the data, Mr. Jones, Mr. Young, you're right on point about the data. We've seen, and Dr. Peters knows, I've been the biggest critic of the STEM education system. We've not seen any drastic increases, but rather we're in a new industry. So this industry is coming out whether we like it or not. So how do we leap forward? Here's the essence of it, is that there's something that no one's really talking about. This is going to be one of the first panels in the nation talk about the quantum supply chain. When we can get minority business enterprises part of the domestic supply chain in the area of quantum, we've jumped decades ahead, and that's just something that I want to stress.
And you were real good with bringing on Dr. Smith, because that's where I was going next. Again, I do want to honor her as well. She represents clergy in the community as well as myself. But Reverend Dr. Smith, can you tell us how you view quantum literacy in the area of science, and how it intersects with the workforce development work of urban communities and faith-based organizations?
Well, I think one of the things that the Ministers' Conference looked at when we did the CDC was the importance of looking at how to usher in the new era of technological workforce, because we saw that this was at the forefront, but more importantly, as we learned with COVID and other situations, the dearth of technology in the community. Yeah. So if we have a community that's not ready to receive or not ready to engage these jobs, we're looking at a community that's going to be further left out. And we're going to look at a community of a generation of unmarketable people, and also they're looking at the broader scope of career. Plus, there is a social justice component to this as well, because as Dr. Akers talked about, people of color, minorities, are usually left out of this type of going forward in the technological fields. So in looking at that, we had to find a way, and one of which is our tech center model, where we were able, with seed money from Verizon and Maglev, we're able to put tech centers in the community. Yeah. And so they have become portals, if you will, for our children to excel into everything from 5G technology to AI. And so I'm proud when you can go to Harlem Park, when you can go to Park Heights, or when you can go to Pennsylvania and Dolphin, and these kids are able to articulate technical things such as quantum. They can come to Morgan and do tournaments and things of that accord. But even though I know that they're the minority.
Yeah.
And so we have to do this on a larger scale.
Yeah. Did you want to add to that?
My good friend Dr. Akers has put out there called hyper disparities.
Right.
Yeah, I like that.
And we have some hyper disparities in our community. And what we're trying to do is to bridge that gap of hyper disparities when it comes to quantum literacy.
Correct.
Yeah, one of the things I had a wonderful career at the National Security Agency, and that is coupled with the question that Dr. Peters asked me about spirituality. Not only, and I worked for the National Security Agency for about 10 years as a science analyst, and so early on, this was an interest of mine, and I remember then getting a love for community and going back to school for social work. But you asked me a question about the interconnectedness of faith, spirituality, and also faith communities, urban communities as well. And one of the questions that came to me was, how do our faith beliefs and also our practices connect with the worldview of the current day workforce as it relates to quantum as well? But when you start to look at the interconnectedness of faith, it's what Dr. Smith just said, it's going to be a home, especially when you understand literacy, because when you start talking about quantum, you start to look at it from two angles. You start to look at quantum entanglement, quantum superposition, particle and the duality of particle and waves, and entanglement. You start to look at the fact that from a faith perspective, there are four what they call Barbour models that looks at not only faith as, is it faith and science in conflict? Are they integrated? Are they disconnected? And or are they in dialogue? And that's been the model that's been in place for faith and science for some time now. And I would argue that they're very integrated, and quantum brings us to the age where you start to see the worldview of faith and science come together, only in the sense that when you look at quantum physics, particularly the three things: the interpretation or the observer's interpretation of events is number one, but then also the uncertainty of physical states.
Yes, sir.
But then lastly, when you start to take a look at the interconnectedness of the world and of people, that's already a part of a faith, so to speak, dimension because of interconnectedness, but then also of uncertainty and or who holds certainty, so to speak. But then lastly, even when you look at quantum, when you start to look at the theory of literacy, I'm connecting the worldviews in a thread, because even when you start to look at quantum literacy or theory of literacy, you start to still see, following the quantum model, is, of course, the construction of the interpretation of meaning in our schools.
Yes, sir.
But then next you start to look at the uncertainty of interpretation of meaning. But then lastly, you start to look at the interconnectedness of meaning. So when you layer the faith dimension, when you layer quantum, and then you layer where our educational system is, you have a beautiful marriage of the three. And it's easier to take that marriage and provide literacy, particularly people in our urban communities. So that's what makes this a phenomenal moment and a phenomenal idea.
Well, no, Bishop, please forgive me, because this is where, Mr. Young, I was going to ask, because it ties, given what you just said, it excited me, and I was really curious.
Mr.
Young, that's like the God particle, like they talk about the God particle.
I'm serious, because I'm sitting here trying to figure out, we have a present education system that's not the very best.
Right.
And so now you're going to ask them, and STEM is just beginning, I would say in the last 3 to 5 years. So now that same education system, the curriculum,
Yes.
is going to have to be reviewed.
Yes, sir.
And I'm not so sure we have as many educators with the talent as this gentleman and others might have. And so in our school system, and then you got to have that explained because it's going to take some resources.
What,
If you're going to need resources, then that
Absolutely.
means that then you got to get some politicos
Right.
who are,
That's the
as
issue.
I was for 23 years, trying to figure out now what they laying on us.
Well, for me, it's not one of the, it's we must. Okay, it is this era, this epic change, and we went from an agricultural-based economy to an industrial-based economy. And then more recently in our lifetimes, we went from the industrial-based economy to the service-based economy, the digital economy. And cities like Baltimore suffered for it, okay? Baltimore, the whole, what they call Rust Belt, suffered for it. And so as those are catching up and getting back on track, there's a few cities that have bounced back from losing their manufacturing. We're now moving to this new quantum age. And again, it's not like it's not going to happen. Okay, it's happened. Okay, so we can't, I don't think we have the time to afford to say, how are we going to do this? Okay, it has to happen.
And to complement what he said, and Mr. Young, this is exactly right. Your point was what we hypothesized originally. We've seen where STEM was just simply not showing any appreciable increase. So we created, to address that exact point, we created what we call micro-credential certification, a way of expediting the learning process significantly quicker, but also it embraces using visual analytics, visual imagery, and others. But we also bringing into this, never been done before, is artificial intelligence in order to kind of take this and blend. So for example, Tim Akers here, I have maybe certain learning deficiencies. So I take our micro-credential or learning challenges because I may learn one way, Ellis may learn another way. But what we've created, our team has been creating is, sir, to answer exactly what you said, is a micro-credential certification. I asked Dr. Peters, since he was primarily built on being
And let
on
me
this.
explain what micro-credential certification is. It's a way of getting deeper learning, okay, on a specialized skill. You might want to talk about it as being a mini course where you're specializing in learning specific things. So when we talk about quantum literacy, we're talking about a fast-track course that we're going to implement with ROTC cadets, okay? But once we do that, we can replicate that to K through 12, okay? And you said something that was critical, that the curriculum at K through 12 has to change to include quantum. And so we're gonna do that, piggyback with artificial intelligence.
But not only that, you have to, what I believe Senator Young is getting at is that there has to be a behavioral change. And I think Dr. Daniels hit upon it too. But the mysticism of physics and the church, there's always been a somewhat of a ganache. And so I look at quantum as a way of bridging that gap. Because you're really looking at the sum of the whole experience. When you look at I think Mr. Brown and Dr. Daniels, Bishop Daniels also talked about the overall and where do I fit in. So you begin to get that left side of the brain moving a little bit more. And then you also have to look at the interdisciplinary part of it. You're gonna have to have different type of counselors. You're gonna have to have people that can do a parallel process to make sure that these children are children, young adults, and people who are looking to advance in their employment, because current employment is now being hindered because of all of the technology that's coming in. So not only are you not ready in terms of coming up in K through 8, you're not ready in college, and you're not ready in your current job. So you can't advance. It pigeonholes you. So on a community level, in particular, and working with these different corporations, what we've been able to see, especially since the position of Baltimore, we are in a really good position because of import and export. So we have access to really the Midwest. So, you know, in terms of our import and export, that becomes a job that somebody in the community can understand. They may not understand quantum or quantum theory, but they can understand getting a unionized job being able to work on the port or somewhere else. Now, my experience in this was like, okay, how are we gonna do this? But the practicality of quantum is what people are missing. When I went to the port for a visit, and when I went to other distribution centers, what I noticed is that nothing blue collar is blue collar anymore. You have to look at things like the leachate system. You can't transmit underground anymore. So how do you move these cranes? Quantum. It's quantum. It's the different AI. Those systems work on AI. Those systems work on different technological.
From iPhones to microwaves to your television.
Quantum is in your pocket.
And I argue, I could have a quantum conversation with you, and just the format that I gave as it relates to literacy and being able to approach the literacy of quantum, I could have a conversation with you, and I would say, give us a day or a weekend, and you would understand quantum just by the conversation that I had as far as the interpretation of events. And understanding superposition. I could give it to you in a faith perspective, and I've been doing it all over the country, the Joint College of Bishops, and now as a global consultant in South America to a lot of Jamaica. I had a conversation with them recently. All I talked about was quantum, but I gave it to them in a literacy format that they could culturally mediate as it relates to instruction is concerned.
But you got credibility, high credibility, and you got to make sure that whoever comes out can be articulated and brings about a certain cred, so that it becomes believable. It can occur, such as all of you here on this panel.
Well, Bishop, I would welcome to hear a sermon.
Absolutely.
You say, put it over there. It's a meeting on Sundays, right?
On quantum.
Yeah, and I talk about it all the time because, again, it's the closest to, when you start to look at the invisible, it becomes the closest worldview to what people of faith would understand. Superposition, that you can be in more than one place at the same time, but when you observe it, then you truncate it to, I can have that conversation, entanglement, how I don't have to be in your presence in order for me to still be entangled with you.
Right.
All of those kind of things are quantum principles that don't violate spiritual principles at all.
And sir, when you said, Bishop, when you said uncertainty, you threw a kernel out there, the uncertainty principle. I heard, I could tell you were doing that.
Yes, sir.
And right now, if you think about like when CERN created, and they had what they call the God particle. We all heard about that quite a few years ago.
VMAT-2.
I'm sorry?
The VMAT-2 is what they call it.
Exactly, that's right. So that's the excitement that we felt, like Dr. Peters and our team, is that we came, how do you excite the young mind to want to engage something? Like you just said, Mr. Young, absolutely. STEM, I'm the biggest critic of it because I've seen no appreciable increase. So how do we leap forward beyond that? Because to me, STEM has been very discrete, math, science, education, and all. Whereas quantum is literally the best of all. It brings it together, and it excites. And if we can get the students excited about learning, you've done something we've not been able to do in STEM.
But that's culturally mediated instruction
And exposure.
Bring it to their worldview. Start where they are. We talk about that in social work.
Yes, sir.
Start where they are and walk them to where they need to be. And that's the beauty of quantum literacy that we are embarking upon as a team here at Morgan State.
I would even add to that, in education, we talk about culturally responsive pedagogy.
That is right.
Yes.
Okay.
That is right.
And what that means is you connect your subject matter, to the culture.
To the culture.
Okay?
The science of teaching.
That is where we have to go in STEM and quantum. And I would argue, I continue to argue, that we would see advancement as it relates to literacy of the quantum, and we would move it in a micro credentialing way.
I just want to stay back to Senator Young's comment, because our school system is so
challenged.
Right, and that's a nice word. I think it's one of the things that is practical with our children, that they're masters at, that quantum is already, and that it can be further inculcated, is gaming. These kids are masterful, and quantum is all through gaming. So you start at where that's the draw. I'm not saying gaming will be the only draw, but you use, a lot of the children are not faring well in the system, Baltimore City school system, because there is a lack of motivation. You don't have, and it's not to indict these teachers, because sometimes just showing up, you know, is a feat in itself, but it's also a feat for both the student and for the teacher, because these children live in urban environments where poverty is the politicity of the day for them. So they're stuck in the mode of survival. That translates over to a game, because you see them doing survival games and things like that, and then they can then see themselves, as Dr. Daniels talks about with quantum theory, you can then see yourself as a part of a larger piece, so then you can understand, and that translates over to jobs, because a lot of them need jobs, because unfortunately, young people are put in situations where they have to, generate income for their family. So while it may be us as an astute panel to say, okay, I see how this becomes jobs and how it connects with industry, but you're actually putting the young person, by giving them a job, into the larger global, national and global conversation around workforce development. Does that?
It does.
Well, yeah, it's coming home now. You ready?
Exactly.
I saw you still looking.
I'm going to comment on your comments to say what you've done in 2 minutes is keeping it real.
Absolutely, keeping it real.
Keeping it real. We do know we have challenges in our school system, and how can we make that connection and motivate those kids to get into these kinds of areas?
I want to go back to your pedagogy, and I'm going to leave it alone. I think that you guys, and particularly you and Dr. Akers and Dr. Daniels, I'm a community grassroots person, but I think the fact that you understand and are astute enough to say that the pedagogy has to change.
Yeah.
The way that you teach these children have to change.
And 2 years ago, and what you just said and what Dr. Peters just said, 2 years ago, Dr. Peters organized the first national STEM conference that focused on quantum literacy in the quantum age. It was all through the region. There were hundreds of students, about 1,300 attended. There were hundreds waiting, and then he put me on the stage involuntarily, really told me to get up there, and he said, talk to them about quantum. And I said, who in here has heard of quantum? Not one hand went on. I said, who in here likes to play games? Raise your hand. Every hand went up. And then we said, we describe quantum as it relates to the game. So with the fast, the nature, the changing, we know our team members are in gaming, also some of them. So we know that if we can introduce a game of a rocket ship that's in two different positions, superposition, you're teaching them to think that way, they can embrace it and learn something. Senator Young, like they leap forward ahead, a quantum leap beyond STEM ed.
And I don't want to diminish, and I don't want to diminish the brilliancy of our kids.
Right.
In the sense that they know, my niece know how to take my cell phone.
Yeah, they all do.
And teach me. They are at a human frequency.
Yes, sir.
Where they are readily open and available. I think you said something very powerful. It is the pedagogy and how we instruct culturally. Because if you could talk about a basketball game and use quantum literacy to bring that level of understanding there, I think we got something very, very powerful.
Yeah, I want to get back to Tim and when I put him on the spot at that meeting. I was up at the podium, and not to indict politicians, we had some politicians speaking, and he texted me a message, boring, boring. They were talking about different things politicians talk about.
And so
I went back on, I said,
okay,
you get up.
and you comment on what quantum was, and
He made the students feel engaging. What I'm trying to say is that we've got to excite them.
Yeah.
We've got about this whole new area of study, and kids will embrace it.
And this is important, Reverend Bishop, I just want to share, is our team has looked at hundreds of photos, and we see virtually, on record, virtually nothing reflecting the historic populations that we're trying to target. Not there, not at the table, not in the photos, not part of the research groups. So how do we This is what we came up with, a National Quantum Literacy Network, to network with individuals that have never been at the table. They've never been invited. And we've got to change, Senator, like you said, we've got to change that, sir. And this is the only way. This is what our team said. How do we do it? We create a National Quantum Literacy Network. So that way, when we're talking about quantum supply chain, very important word to the minority business enterprises out there, is that right now the U.S. is looking at domestic supply chain businesses in this. From the smallest manufacturing of a piece of this new quantum computing that's evolving, or technologies. But we are in need as a nation of a quantum supply chain.
Bishop, let me just add this little comment that I was inspired about when we were working with this project. Dr. Akers, he's a good friend of mine, as you all well know, you can tell from this panel. He went into the archives. He found a photograph that was dated 1946. And Albert Einstein was giving a lecture to a group of faculty and students at Lincoln University, a historically black college. He understood back in 1946 the importance of diversity and inclusion. And we're still struggling with that today.
Yeah.
We're still struggling with it.
And it also too adds into the health factor, because that means that there's a large part of this technology in the health field. You look at University of Maryland with the Proton Center. You look at the innovations that's being done, and that's for cancer. You look at the innovation that's being done with the molecular structure of the cancer cells at Hopkins. You know, we're fortunate enough to have those entities located, world-renowned entities located in Baltimore, but then you also look at the disparities, the health disparities of African Americans, and you also look at the other people, the other indigenous people and people of color. This gives them a segue into the health issue, because, and it also gives a segue into the criminal justice. See, it's a whole matrix, if you will, of different areas that quantum will affect. And again, it's a connection through technology. You know, we were looking at, and I'll just use this as an example, again, we have to make it like mother's milk on a community level. So we were talking with another colleague of mine that's in the quantum area, and they're in the process of developing the prototype where you will teach a young person carpentry in glasses. The person is guiding you. No more teacher.
Augmented reality and virtual reality.
Right. The glasses are guiding you. And I always tell students, when I talk to them, they say, well, computers are erasing our jobs. I said, well, no, it's the shift, because you talked about that. Yep. It's the industrial, you know how we shifted throughout the years? I said, computers don't erase jobs. People have to learn how to run computers. That's right. And then they become the new jobs. So in looking at that, I just look at how we need to approach it from a holistic, yet eclectic purview, because if we don't, we'll miss out on opportunities to be able to undergird our community in other areas.
And this is happening. This is happening whether people embrace it or not.
That's it.
It's actually happening. I've read somewhere we're in the fourth industrial revolution, so to speak, as it relates to what we're looking at, quantum and all of those things. And in our waning moments, as far as the panel is concerned, I just want to go around and just have some final thoughts after you've heard it all. I know this is embryonic in the sense of conversation, and we're going to be, and I'm so glad that it's here on Morgan State University's campus. I'm so glad that we have the premier radio host in our midst, and we can get this out, how critical it is, get it out to teachers, get it out to politicians, that we found a way of literacy to begin to work with communities, also those students that come to the campuses as well. But in our weaning moments, just share final, I'm gonna go around, just share your final thoughts at this moment.
Like you, Pastor Reverend Dr.
Bishop, yeah.
I've always appreciated you, Kevin. I'm thankful that you're here moderating this. I'm thankful, Tim. And again, as quiet as it's been kept, this whole notion about Morgan being engaged in quantum has come from Tim Akers. He's been talking about it for years, and it was through his persistent efforts at pushing it that Morgan is finally saying, yeah, let's do this. Let's be amazing. And I'm glad that Morgan has made that decision.
Thank you, Dr. Akers.
And Reverend Bishop, I have to say it, Reverend, and I have to say it, I'm just a messenger. That's all I am, is just a messenger. And a messenger, literally, what God would expect and move a mindset. But I'd like to also thank the National Science Foundation because they saw a vision. They brought us into the Convergence Accelerator. Our team competed with everyone else, top other institutions like ours all over the country. If it wasn't for the National Science Foundation in working with us, we would still be pushing it, but it has helped us tremendously. So I'd like to thank the National Science Foundation.
Dr. Smith, just share from the grassroots.
Mm-hmm.
I always I try to make an example that not only academicians but young people can get. And I remember one point in time that we were getting a lot of credit for the negativity around the wire.
Yeah.
Y'all remember? But it was one episode where, and you know we have some of the best mathematicians on the corner, but it was one episode where the older brother was trying to teach the young brother and his little brother algebra. And he was like, I can't understand how you understand the count, meaning the drug count and how the money was run, but you can't understand algebra. And you know what he said? He said, he said in a different way, but he was saying, if you get the count wrong, there's a consequence. Yeah. And it comes with a certain brutality to it. So that goes back to the point of, if it becomes a priority, and if we can articulate through literacy, through the foundation and through other entities, if we can make this be seen as a priority, in other words, young people, if you don't get it, you're not gonna get it. You know what I'm saying? If we can make it that clear on the grassroots level, then I think that we'll be cooking with grease. And I would like to say to my colleagues on this board, in particular with Dr. Daniels has been at the forefront of making sure that community is integral, if not the priority, in the church world. We have to understand that while we're here to do the will of God is also making sure, as he said, at the forefront is where people are, and then be able to inculcate these type of services that we need to, what is it, Dr. Daniels, for the widow and the orphan?
That is right.
We got to bring them up.
The least of these.
The least of these.
Dr. Peters.
Yeah, so I'm going to piggyback on what my colleague said and talk about opportunity. Opportunity, Mr. Young. This is what quantum brings to our community. An opportunity to engage, to sit at the table on the forefront of technology where we're always trying to catch up. If we can get our young people engaged in quantum and quantum literacy at an early age, maybe it can solve some of the problems that we have in our community. That's what I want to talk about, opportunity.
Okay.
Senator.
Well, I came as a doubting Thomas. But I must admit that I feel comfortable. I think we should proceed to do what's necessary. We have a theme at Radio 1 called Where Information is Power. So the question now is to get the information to the people so they can become more powerful.
Yeah.
Yes, and to all of us, again, even as we close, this has been exciting.
Yeah.
This is yet challenging, but yet it creates an opportunity. And I would say that the future is already now.
Yeah.
In this moment. And thank you, Morgan State University, Dr. Tim Akers, and all of you for just, again, the School of Social Work for hosting this kind of process on this campus. And I just believe that we're in for a wonderful and awesome journey.